Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tech Bytes with CTO. My name is Delta Newman, and I'm a project specialist here at MSU's Extension Center for Technology Outreach. And today I have with me Dr. John Giesemann. He is our extension professor with us here in the CTO, and we thank you for joining us today. And do you want to give us a little insight on what you do here?
Well, what I do here, other than irritate people, is I try to do training. I've been doing training for quite a while. I think longer than you've been alive, Delta. But I I used to tell people that my mission was to stamp out ignorance wherever it raises its ugly head. So if somebody doesn't know how to do something, I try to get them where they can do that better and easier.
Yeah, that's awesome. You probably have been doing this longer than I've been alive. Um, so how long have you been here with this department?
I started with Extension on January 1st, 1983.
That's awesome.
Right, excuse me, 85.
That's awesome. Dr. John here, he's got a wealth of knowledge. He knows a lot, and it's fun just to sit here and kind of pick his brain apart, which is what we're going to do today. Today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Word, and he's going to give us some of his tips and tricks, and he's got a lot of them. So we'll just jump right in, and the way this is going to go, I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, and then he's going to talk about it with us. So first is going to be, what do you think are the top 5 most important skills for using Microsoft Word?
Delta, there was a private in the Army, and he was lazy. He liked to do things easily, so the sergeant always gave him hard jobs to do. And he said that he complained to the sergeant one time. He said, "Sarge," he said, "why do you always give me these bad jobs?" And he said, "Son, you're the laziest man in the Army, and I know that if I give you a job to do, you'll find the absolute easiest way to do it, and then I could tell everybody else." And that's the way I am. I'm lazy. I'm not a good typist, so anything I can do to make things go faster and easier, I do that. I'm like that private. I'm the laziest man in the extension service, so I want to do that. So what my favorite skill in using Word is using keystrokes. When I started with word processing documents, we didn't even have a mouse. So I'm a keyboard kid or a keystroke kid, whereas almost everybody today is a mouse baby. They want to do it with a mouse. But I find that the way I type, if I take my hands off the keyboard, then I may put them in the wrong place when I get back to the keyboard, or it takes me longer to get the mouse, click on something, put the mouse back, and then go back to the keyboard than just using a keystroke. So I like to use a lot of the keystrokes, and I've probably got 30 or 40 keystrokes that I use that I've memorized. And if you use them consistently, and you can use them in Word and Excel and PowerPoint and Access and a lot of other different programs. You can use a lot of them on the internet. You can use them between other programs that you find. I like to use keystrokes. That's my number one tip for efficiency in using almost any program that you've got. I think the second most important skill for Word is probably saving early and saving often. Every class I teach, that's my number one rule for using computers is save early and save often, so that you don't lose things as you go. A lot of people like to depend on autosave, but I don't. I tell people as soon as you get enough text on the screen that you don't want to lose it, save it. And all you have to do is Control S and then just keep right on typing. It saves it and you can go. And then you don't have to worry about losing it. If you type like I do, it's important to not lose it. I think probably the third is learning to use tabs to line stuff up on the screen. I see people, for example, if you're doing an agenda and you want the time on the left-hand side and the topic in the middle and the person that's going to talk about that topic on the right-hand side, or you're doing a program for an award ceremony that you're having, or your 4-H dinner or something like that, where you need things to line up, you have to use tabs to do that, because you can't use the paragraph alignment options. You can only, you have left, center, and right alignment, but you can only use one of those on the line. Whereas if you need left, center, and right alignment on the same line, you use tabs to do that. And if you'll learn to use tabs efficiently and effectively, that makes life a lot easier when you're trying to line stuff up.
Yeah, I will say that I took one of your trainings a couple weeks ago, and where you were showing us how to use tabs, and I was like, man, I wish I'd known this years ago. It'd have been saved me so much time from trying to figure out how to make things line up, and frustration fighting with my documents. So yeah, tabs are a big one, and they can be very helpful.
Another one I think important skill for using Word is, if you use graphics at all, then you really need to learn all the options that are available for that. To me, the most important thing about putting a graphic in is I like to type my document first and then come back and put in the graphics. That way I can see where I want to put it in the document and so on. But when you're doing graphics, I like to have the text on the screen and then click near where I want that graphic to appear. And that way, when it comes in, it's going to be at the point of that cursor, and then it's a lot easier to move it and size it and do all the other things that you need to do, such as setting the wrap options on there. So if you'll learn how to at least use moving, sizing, and setting the wrap options on text, and putting the cursor where you want the item to appear first, I think those 4 things will make you far more efficient at using graphics. And then one of the other things that I do a lot is I select text or move around the document. And I use keystrokes to select text often. And you can even select with the mouse instead of having to click and drag everything, especially if you want to highlight large amounts of text. For example, you can do Control A as a keystroke to select. A is for all the text. So you can do Control A. For example, if you had it in Calibri 11 and you wanted to do Times New Roman 12, that was your favorite, then you can just do Control A, set your font, hit OK, and everything is set. And you don't have to click at the top and then drag down to the bottom. And if it's several pages, it can be a real pain. So I like to use the keystrokes for selecting, and or the mouse options. There's some options for the mouse that make selecting a lot easier when you're trying to, you want to change the font, you want to boldface it because you forgot to, or you want to move the text from one place to another. Using those selection tools, the keyboard selection tools or the mouse selection tools, can make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, those are some really good skills, and that will give you a really good start to being good at using Word, and just those few things can help. So the next question I have for you is, what are a few of the most common problems or mistakes that users experience using Word that you've seen?
The biggest one that I see all the time is trying to line things up by spacing things over. It's just because we almost exclusively use what are called proportional fonts, where each letter only takes up the amount of space that it has to on the line. It's almost impossible to line things up by just spacing over. Now, you might get them at the front because every line you space over 5 or something like that. But if you've got more than one column of data and you're trying to line it up by spacing it over, it's just not going to work more than a line or two. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see people fight. Lining stuff up in columns, it just amazes me how hard it is for them and how frustrated they get trying to do that. And if they would learn to use tabs, you can do that quickly and easily, learning to use tabs. Probably the second thing that I see that people get frustrated about is adding a graphic and then the stuff just goes crazy. Everything after that goes crazy, or it's a really big picture and you can't see where everything is going and things like that. So if we learn just a basic concept about putting the cursor where you want the graphic and then sizing, setting the wrap options, and moving. If we can learn those four basic things about graphics, it makes life a whole lot easier. If you like to put graphics in there to get people's attention and so on.
Yeah, so just to give a little context of what he means with spacing in columns is he's referring to when we're trying to line stuff up in columns, we're using the space bar trying to space them and line them up ourselves, in which that can be an issue when we're using that proportional font that he's talking about. That's something he showed us in the tabs training that I didn't even know there was a such thing as proportional fonts. And I was like, well, no wonder I have so much trouble trying to use my space bar and when I should be using the tabs. So tabs is a really important feature of Word. We can go to the next one, and that'll be, what is one thing that you think users can do to become more proficient at using Word?
Delta, when the way I learned to type was I typed my dissertation. My wife couldn't type. My wife would not type my dissertation, so I had to do it myself, and I didn't have enough money to pay somebody to do it. Back then, a lot of it was typed on a typewriter, and we didn't have all the options we have now. So I learned to type by typing my dissertation, which was 400 pages.
Wow.
And I was a far better typist at the end of that than I was before. So my key is, number one, type a lot of documents, but learn those skills that you need to type those different documents. For example, you could type a lot of documents, but if you space everything over to try to line those columns up, you're not helping yourself any. But if you learn to use tabs in that, so if I do just a regular letter, if I do programs or agendas, if I do what my quick references, if I do a newsletter, if I do any one of a number of different documents that require different skills, particularly tabs and graphics, then I think we become a lot more proficient. Of course, the key there is we don't type a lot of documents the same way that we've always typed them. We type a lot of documents and learn to use those tabs and graphics and other options that make us more efficient and more effective at doing those documents. So just typing. I know a lot of us avoid typing whenever we can, and we do that because we're so frustrated because we don't know how to get things to line up or get graphics to go in there where we want them. So I think typing a lot of documents that require a lot of different skills, but learning those and practicing those skills as you do it is the best way to become proficient at using Word.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, just thinking about it, we try not to type as much as we can. I mean, I know with me, if I can get my point across in a graphic and not have to type out this big paragraph, I'm definitely doing that. But yeah, just practicing for sure. I know after you showed me all of those things about tabs and graphics in your trainings, I just went back and started messing around with it and just playing with it. And I learned so much stuff that I didn't even know it could do. So that was very helpful. I know you have lots of hacks for Microsoft Word. Do you want to share some of those with us?
Yeah, I first of all are my keystrokes. I use all kinds of keystrokes, and of course, to me, Control S for saving early and saving often is the number one hack. But I like to use Control P for print. And you just do Control P and hit enter, and boom, it's going to print your whole document. But then there's a lot of other ones. You use Control B, Control I, Control U for boldface, italics, and underline. You can do Control A for selecting, or you can use the Shift key and so on. But learning to use the keystrokes will make you a lot more efficient. Two things that Word does that I don't like. One is it uses the default font of Calibri 11, and I don't like that font. I grew up using Times New Roman, so I use Times New Roman 12. And when you open your font box, you can set those, and then down at the bottom left corner it says Set as Default. And you set the font that you like, that you want to use as your default, and then click that button, and then the next time you open a document, it's going to be at Times New Roman 12. And that way you don't have to select it to start with and start typing, or when you get through, do Control A for select all and do that. So that's one that I like, is to set that default font. And then another one that frustrates me is the paragraph options. Most of the time it's set to add space between paragraphs of the same type. And I don't like that. I like mine to be single spaced as a general rule, and if I want to change it, I will. So you can go into the line spacing options box and set all those up, and then there's a little box that you can check that says don't do this between paragraphs of the same type. And then it also has a set as default option. So you can go in there and, I'll set it as single spacing, no space after the paragraph, no space before the paragraph. Don't do this, don't put space after paragraphs of the same type. And that's probably most of it. And then I'll set as default. And that way I don't have to change those options every time I do a new document. Because most of the time we don't want extra spacing between paragraphs at the same time. So those are, between learning the keystroke combinations and setting your default fonts and your default paragraph options or line spacing options, your frustration level can go down. And then if you use numbered paragraphs, or if you use bullet lists a lot, I prefer certain ways of doing those. So you can click the File menu, and then down at the very bottom it has options. And you can set a lot of things about Word as your default, so that you don't have to, every time you hit a bullet list, it pops over here, and you don't like that. Or every time you do asterisk tab, it automatically does a bullet list. You can tell it, no, don't do those. If I want a bullet list, I'll do it myself. And I set a lot of options under File and Options. For example, I don't like to use the 1/2 inch character. Instead of 1/2, if you type that, Word will automatically change that to the 1/2 inch character. But it only does 1/2, 1/4, and 1/8. And if you use 1/2 or 3/8 or whatever, then 3/8 will not be done. 1/2 will, or 1/8 will. So I like them to be consistent. So I turn that off in the options. So there's a lot of things I do in there. I just go to File, go to Options, and then there's several different tabs that we can go to set things the way that you use them in your typing. And then you can set styles of fonts. For example, in my quick references, I use a certain style for keystrokes that I do. I use another style for when I say to click on the File menu and then this option and then this option. I use another style for that, so that when I'm doing the quick references, I can just type that in, and then I can quickly apply that style, and the letters everything will look the same for all of my keystroke combinations, like Control P, Control S, and so on, or my directions for using things, such as click the home menu click the font box, and then click the font that you want. So you can set those styles if you use different types of fonts for different things in a document. You can set those. So those are some of my favorite hacks for using for Word. And then maybe one more: learn to use the Format Painter. The Format Painter is the little paintbrush up at the top left corner of the home ribbon. And what you can do there is, if you have something in your document that you like and you want that format for another area, you can select that paragraph, click or double click the Format Painter. It depends on which one you want to do. And then you just go drag your mouse across whatever it is, and boom, it looks the same as the other one. So you just take that format that you've got and paint it over other areas, and it makes life a lot easier and quicker, because that way you can just go down through there typing, and then you can come back and say, okay, I'll set this one the way I want, and then I'll just take that painter and paint over the other options so that it all looks the same, and I don't have to do it all as I'm typing. That saved me a whole lot of time over the years, especially in quick references that I do, where I want all these to look the same. So that Format Painter is a pretty neat little hack, neat trick.
Yeah, the setting the default fonts and line spacings can be very beneficial for, like, if you're a student writing papers and your professor wants them in a certain style, we can go ahead and set that default. Because I know I spent a lot of time in college. I would type up my whole paper, and then I'd have to go change the font and the size of the font and line spacing. So that's one thing we can do to just be more efficient. And also the Format Painter, I didn't even know that was a thing until you showed us. And that one has been super helpful, because I can go into a document and create a section however I want it to look, and then make my whole document look like that really easily. So that's a good thing. Do you have anything else you want to share about Word? Anything you think our listeners need to know?
Well, years ago, we started out using WordStar on the old Radio Shack machines, and then we went to WordPerfect when we came to the hard drive computers. They would have been called Windows computers. And then we went to Microsoft Word. And we had a word processing department at that time that would create big documents for you and make them look good. And I would send something down to them in Microsoft Word, and they would send it back, and it would be in WordPerfect. And because they preferred WordPerfect over Word. And I told them, no, it has to come back to me in Word. So one of the word processors sent me a document one time that said 25 things that you cannot do in Word that you can do in WordPerfect, or you can do in WordPerfect that you can't do in Word. So I promptly did those 25 things in Word and sent it to her. And about 5 minutes later, she was sitting in my office. And she said, I thought you can't do these in Word. I said, no, they're harder to do in Word. Some of them significantly harder, but you can do them in Word. You can't, they might be easier in WordPerfect, but you can do them in Word. So she said, okay, I'll switch over to Word, but you have to teach me. And I said, that's not a problem. I'd be glad to do that. That's what I do. The point is, if you say, I wonder if I can do this in Word, the chances are you can, and the chances are there's probably a way to do it that makes it easier. And if you will get on some of the forums and stuff on the internet and say, how do I do this? Then the people will be more than happy to say, well, do it this way. I do a lot of hiking, so I'm on a lot of hiking groups. And so when I want to learn information on a particular topic, or I want to know what's a new trail to hike or something like that, I'll get on that and ask those questions, and people are more than happy to share their opinions. Fortunately, on the hiking groups, there's not a bunch of people that get pretty mouthy and stuff, but they're pretty nice. But some of the some of the groups I wouldn't get on, but the point is, I wonder if I could do this a better way. So learn to do that a better way, or ask the people, as Andy Griffith would say, ask the people what do know, and they could probably show you a much more efficient and effective way to do that. So that's, I tell people I've been very fortunate in that I've always worked in a department where I could ask people how to do things because I'm not a computer specialist. I'm an agricultural education. That was my degree.
Right.
And I just, as Andy Griffith says, I ask the people what do know, and then I try them. So don't be afraid to try new things, and don't be afraid to ask people, is there a better way to do this? And I think you'll be much more effective and efficient at work.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us today. You have given us a lot of information, and I feel like it's going to be really helpful to people. That's all we have for today. So we thank y'all for listening. Both of our contact information can be found on our Extension website directory. Just look us up there. We are in the Extension Center for Technology Outreach. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And if you have any comments or ideas about what you think you want to hear about next, let us know. And thank you for listening to Tech Bytes with CTO.